What's going on, y'all? KM Best here, your favorite 69th ranked Marvel snapper with a guide to the spotlight caches that you need to open in January. First up is the current spotlight cache featuring the card CACHES, a 3/4 that protects your 1 and 6 cost cards with an ongoing ability. I've already posted a deck that I like with her. I think that for the most part, she tends to go with a couple of the big bads. She fits well in High Evolutionary as a sort of replacement for armor that allows you to spread your powerful Nebula and Sunspot around different lanes, and I think she also goes in a lot of Thanos lists as a counterplay to Killmonger, especially those Thanos Lockjaw decks that are also looking to cheat out big 6-cost cards. I think generally her existence is a deterrent to Killmonger, but not one that will remove him from the metagame entirely, because of course you need to get them down in order for her ability to actually stop Killmonger. So Killmonger comes out first, if your opponent has priority, it'll still kill all your 1-cost cards. I've found the immunity from Shang-Chi to be particularly valuable when lockjawing into large units like Magneto, but it's not necessarily required. Basically, I think this is a good card, but she alone should not be the card that you're opening for, most likely. I think she falls a little bit short of the threshold that I would say is worthwhile for opening caches or investing in. That said, my threshold is much higher than others, and I think she is likely to be one of the better cards in the spotlight caches this month. I think she is pretty damn solid, but I don't think she is overwhelmingly powerful in the way cards like Annihilus have been in the past. Alongside CACHES in the caches is High Evolutionary, who has been a relatively consistent part of the metagame in various forms, mostly since his release. With his release, High Evolutionary Lockdown was one of the best decks the game has ever seen. It was swiftly nerfed. Since then, High Evolutionary has existed in both mid-range shells and in She-Not shells, using the power of the large High Evolutionary Hulk alongside She-Hulk in order to put a lot of power on the board on the final turn of the game. And of course, since you are skipping in order to make that happen, you end up getting a lot of use out of cards like Misty Knight and Cyclops off of the High Evolutionary. However, that deck is, to me, the sort of bare minimum for, I would say, competitive viability. I'm not going to think you're screwing up playing She-Not. I don't think it's a throw to play it, but it's sort of like you must be this tall to ride. She-Not is the bare minimum for what I would consider a good deck that goes on my tier lists. And it is, unfortunately, at this moment, the best High Evolutionary deck. So if you're in the market for a pretty solid deck, High Evolutionary is a solid card to pick up. If you're a newer player, High Evolutionary is definitely worth the investment because he effectively unlocks 7 new cards just by getting him. But the best of those right now, the best deck you can make with him is still going to be She-Not. Luckily, however, that deck does not require a lot of actual investment. If anything, it feels like this cache is built for you to acquire a She-Not deck. You have High Evolutionary in it, you have CACHES, which can be a useful piece in there, preliminarily speaking, but is not required. And of course, you have the third card here, Nebula. Nebula is one of the strongest 1-drops in the game in the context of scaling upwards. There are no cards that replicate what she does. In terms of lockdown, she is the best 1-drop in basically every lockdown deck. In terms of High Evo She-Not, she is probably second or third, depending on your feelings on Misty Knight. But generally speaking, this is a 1-drop who cannot be replaced in most of the decks that she's in. Or at least, if you do replace her, you are not replacing her with anything that properly mimics what she does. There are no other 1-drops that can get as big as 9 power. Simply doesn't exist. Now, I know people are going to say Sunspot, but you have to invest in Sunspot. It requires a lot of specific things. Not every Nebula deck can afford to be a Sunspot deck. This is a very irreplaceable card. That said, the value of any given 1-drop is relatively minor, I think. You can replace most 1-drops with something else and not see an enormous drop-off. But the thing about Nebula is that there is nothing else that mimics what she does. You will see some significant drop-off because she is the only 1-drop that has significant power on her own. Is she all that good? I think she's pretty solid. And I think specifically this cache does seem oriented towards giving you the tools you need to play a She-Not deck right out of the box. Most of the other cards you need for She-Not are going to be in Series 3. These cards are the ones that are going to be potentially useful. Nebula, High Evolutionary, and Chimera out of the later boxes. So my thought process on this is if you're a new player, you could probably do worse than just opening until you get all three of these and playing She-Not. I think while it's not necessarily the best deck, having a deck that you can just have access to very quickly is very, very valuable. Opening these, Infinitus Series 2, She-Hulk you can get in Series 3 on your free Series 3 card, and Magic is another Series 3 card. And so you end up in this situation where it's like, all right, I can actually just straight up play this deck after opening this box. Outside of that context, I'm not sure how much value this box holds. My advice to you would be to build decks, not cards. That's why I think this box is so intriguing, because it effectively gives you the She-Not deck. However, you do have the minor issue of if you already have like one of these cards, let's say you already have Evo, suddenly this gets a lot less valuable. So please do think about what you want to do with your resources. A new player will get a lot of value out of this because of the build decks, not cards mantra. When you are buying cards, you want to make sure you can use them in a good package basically as fast as you can. A new player will get that out of this. If you already have high Evo, I'm not sure this is a pickup. If you don't have high Evo, it becomes much, much more attractive. The next cache opens up on Tuesday, January 9th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and the spotlight card in it is Hercules. He is the newest release, so he's the one that most people are going to be interested in, and I don't think he's very good. Spoiler alert. He is a 4-cost, 6-power card that has an ability that reads the first time anything moves here, it moves out of here. And I don't really see what this guy is supposed to be doing. Part of me is like, okay, I can do cool things with a vulture, right? I do a turn 5 vulture for 13 power. That's pretty cool. Like, I can't argue with that, right? Like, you go turn 5 you turn 4 Hercules, you go turn 5 Iron Fist of Vulture in there. But I just don't really get the sense it's going to be that good because of how late it comes down. If this card were coming down earlier and you had more than just turn 5 to mess around with it, I think there might be a real world where you can do stuff like, you know, human torching stuff into this and then it moves out of this and then you bounce it and then it goes back again. Like, I think there would be things to play around with there. But since it's a 4-drop, I'm not sure there are that many things to play around with, unfortunately. Pure Bounce is a bit of a specious investment, in my opinion. It's a deck you can try to play, but it's not worth investing in. And Hercules, unfortunately, strikes me as a pure bounce card, and I'm not sure if he's good enough to make that archetype a lot more viable than it currently is. So I would say that Hercules specifically is not worth opening caches for. Next to Hercules in the caches is Werewolf by Night, and I do not necessarily think he's as bad as people think he is. I would not be surprised if he ended up being a lot better than most people thought he was after the upcoming balance changes. I think he's pretty solid right now, a pretty good card, and with the potential for balance changes on the 9th, unlikely to hit him, likely to hit some of his greatest competition at the 4-cost slot, cough, cough, Miss Marvel, cough, cough, Loki. I think there could be a world where this guy ends up being a very relevant threat in the metagame again. However, until we get there, I simply cannot know, and I think a lot of the box value here is going to be dependent on this guy specifically, because Hercules is not doing a lot to move it, and I don't think the last card in here is going to be doing a lot to move it. So this box is entirely dependent on Werewolf by Night for making people want to open. Right now, current state, I would say he's probably not worth opening for. That could change very quickly if he becomes the best stat stick in the game after the patch on the 9th. It is my fervent belief that the best stat stick in the game is usually the only one worth playing. Previously, this was Werewolf by Night when he cost 3. Werewolf by Night got nerfed to 4. Miss Marvel became the best stat stick in the game. Now everything plays Miss Marvel. If she gets nerfed, then we'll have to figure out what the best stat stick in the game is going forward. And I think Werewolf has a legitimate chance at being that in a world where Miss Marvel's nerf is actually significant. I'm currently unclear on if it is what was leaked to be changed, that is requiring 2 units in the side lanes as opposed to just 1 unit, or if they're going to do anything further with regards to that. However, any nerf to Miss Marvel does give Werewolf a chance to reclaim his status as the best stat stick, and that's the thing you should be keeping an eye on with this box, because nothing else in it is worth investing in. Remember how I said nothing else in this box is worth investing in? You see that little bit at the bottom of my image right there of Howard the Duck? Yeah, that's the thing that says, do you want to buy this? That's a token price on it. And my answer is no, I don't want to buy this. I have never owned Howard the Duck. I have no plans to own Howard the Duck. It has not negatively impacted me in any way, shape, or form not owning Howard the Duck. This guy sucks. More like Howard the Suck. Don't open caches for this guy under any circumstances. He is literally the last card in the game that I don't own, and I don't want to own him. Like, he's just there. He's been there forever. He lives in my store. You should mimic that. He should live in your store too. He should not live in your collection. Guy sucks. Don't get him. So with that, we have a Hercules card that is not particularly exciting. Probably the worst card you'll ever see in any spotlight cache in Howard the Duck, and then Werewolf by Night. And the frustrating thing about this cache is if Werewolf by Night ends up being the best stat stick in the game again, well, it actually will be worth opening, because that's how good having the best stat stick in the game is. It makes me very annoyed to think about how early they put this one together, and it's like, yeah, they're going to have to get Howard now. They're going to have to get Howard to get that Werewolf, and then they nerfed Werewolf, so whoops. I think that this value of this cache is almost entirely dependent on Werewolf by Night. I don't think either of the other 2 cards are exciting at all. Next up is Meek. He is a 1/1 that has the ability to gain power for each card you discard, and he also moves whenever that ability triggers. He is a bad Morbius, and the reason Morbius is a lot better is because Morbius can be played at any time and get all the power of every card you've discarded this game, whereas Meek only needs to be played on the first turn of the game. Fundamentally, I do not think this guy is going to revive the discard archetype, but that doesn't necessarily mean he is complete ass. He's just, a card that isn't going to revive the discard archetype. However, I don't really know if he's playable pretty much anywhere else. So when you pick up this guy, thinking about my buy decks, not cards rule, you're probably not buying a deck. You're probably buying a card who is probably not going to go in a deck you're going to play a lot. And so that means that Meek himself is not a big draw in his own cache. Annihilus is one of the best damn cards in the entire game. I'm extremely high on this guy, to the point that I have been banging the drum of how good he is basically since he came out. You need specifically to run him with the cards Sentry and the Hood. And generally you throw that in a bounce shell, and that's what I've been doing basically since he was released. It's been very, very successful for me, and it's been so successful that, spoiler alert, there was a leaked nerf to Annihilus scheduled to happen on the 9th. Now, that leaked nerf removed his ability to send over 0-cost cards and had him drop all the way to 5 power. I think if that nerf goes through as is, and we were told that it is not final, but if that nerf goes through as is, this is a much worse card, not because of the change in the effect, which I honestly don't think impacts what he does well, which is work with the Hood and work with Sentry's Void, but because of the nerf to power. Going down to 5/5 will be a significant hit. Now, I thought about this for a while, and I figure, okay, here's my scale for this. Annihilus is still probably going to be very good if they drop him to 5/6. He might not be that good if they drop him to 5/5. If they drop him to 5/4, this guy's probably not worth investing in at all. However, this means that you're going to have to keep your eye out for how this card actually gets changed. If it ends up being changed the way it's expected to change on the leak, this is a worse card. I'll probably still be playing around him, but only because I'm kind of an Annihilus diehard. If he loses 1 point of power, I think he still ends up very good. If he loses 2, got a bit of a problem here. So that said, if he does not get nerfed, this is one of the absolute best cards in the game. He is unbelievable, one of the absolute best. I cannot say that enough. I'm literally just going to have my whole analysis as he is so worth it. I consider Annihilus absolutely worth opening for, and the degree of the nerf will determine how much that stays true. Phoenix Force is really interesting in the sense that it is a deck that is not very good, But my mantra of buy decks, not cards, does mean that for some people, this just unlocks a whole new archetype, and that really does have value. I think that this is generally not going to be a draw for people trying to get this, open this cache, but if you are missing just Phoenix Force from the Phoenix Force deck and you want to play it, I mean, don't let me stop you. Like, I don't think the deck is that good. I think it's borderline playable. It is like a deck that I would not recommend, but it is a deck, and I'm not gonna like see it on ladder and be like, what is this idiot doing playing Phoenix Force? I'll be like, okay, it's Phoenix Force, I have to respect it. But I won't recommend it. That said, if you're one card away and that card is Phoenix Force, I mean, I can't really honestly tell you it's not worth it, right? Getting a new playstyle added to your arsenal is honestly pretty sick. Just make sure it's something you're actually interested in. As far as this cache goes, I think that Meek is not very good, and like the last cache, this is going to be very dependent on how good Annihilus is in a post-January 9th nerf meta. If Annihilus ends up being as good as he currently is, this is a slam dunk open just to get Annihilus. He's that good. Meek, not a draw. Phoenix Force, rarely a draw. Annihilus is a draw. And I think that that is a very significant thing when you think about both of these caches being like, all right, well, the spotlight cards are not that good, but Werewolf and Annihilus are in them. And it's like, okay, well, I guess I just sort of wish, I think this one is a little bit more compelling because there's the Phoenix Force in it compared to a Howard the Duck. But you should really just sort of think about, do I want Werewolf? Do I want Annihilus? And consider the other cards in here probably like things that can move you a little bit, but that should not be the primary determinants of your decision to open. The Grandmaster is the card in this entire month that I am the most afraid of being incorrect on, because I think he could either be extremely good or just never really figure out a good home. And there is a lot of things that could determine whether he goes one way or the other. So first things first, he is a 2/0. He has an on reveal ability that takes one of your other on reveal cards at the location you play him at, moves it to the middle, and then makes that on reveal happen again. Now let's look at this card in a little bit of detail. There are a couple things to note. The first is 0 power. That means he works with Mr. Negative. He works with Ravonna Renslayer. Ravonna Renslayer already goes in all the Mr. Negative decks, so keep that in mind. It also means that your next logical thought process is what works well with this card, Mr. Negative, and Ravonna Renslayer. And an answer that I came up with was White Tiger. And suddenly you can start to see how this deck starts to make sense. Now, the reason I have doubts about it is I just don't think a card like this has ever been really, really good in the history of Marvel Snap. Like this sort of weird combo BS type thing. It's just never actually been the best deck. Not since the beta when Sarah Negative was around and everyone was bad at the game and farming bots. I just don't think that this kind of design has ever been that good. However, you take a look at something like Loki and it's like, that thing's never been good. That kind of design has never been good. And it's because that kind of design has never really existed. And I think you can make that argument for the Grandmaster, where he is just doing so much cool stuff. He's going to do so many powerful things that it just ends up being too good of a card. And I think this card is either going to be incredibly good or not very good. And I think that is entirely going to be dependent on how reliable he is as a card on his own. Because it's clear he fits in these like Mr. Negative combo shells, but I'm not sure those decks are good enough to take him to prominence. So then the question goes, what else can he go in? Can you put him in Bounce and reuse Beast? Is that even good? People like to say that that's good, and I can see how it would be, but it's like, what are you doing if it's not Beast? Are you just reusing another 1-drop? You getting a second hood? Is that good? Maybe. Probably. It sounds good to me. You get to play Bast to make him not a 2/0 anymore. Like, there's stuff that this guy does that strikes me as very, very powerful. The question is if the shells he's in can support it. I think right now my instinct would be I'm more compelled by the Bounce stuff than the Mr. Negative stuff. I don't think going like Ravonna, Negative, White Tiger, this guy kind of stuff is like more of a nut draw than Negative already has, basically. But I do think that like there's some interesting considerations for bounce stuff. There's definitely some interesting considerations for various other types of decks. But right now, I gotta say, I feel like if he's not good in bounce, he's probably not gonna be good anywhere. But this is the kind of card that, like, if you're a combo player, if you like being smarter than your opponent, putting your cards together in weird ways, they made this card for you. And I think he's gonna be at least compelling, if not outright good. So I think he could be a reasonable card to open these caches for, but he's the one that's going to require the most context to figure out if he's actually good or not. Well, this guy's been the best card in the game for a while now, and I know people are going to be like, no, it's actually Miss Marvel. I'm like, whatever, fine, sure, I don't really care. Best card, second best card, I still think it's this guy. Loki is also so good that he is on the nerf list for January 9th, and that means that there is a bit of an open question as to how good he's going to be. That said, I think the answer is going to be still very good. The nerf in question is giving him an extra point of power and preventing him from working with cards like Collector and Quinjet, which makes him more of a just good stuff card. He's just got Iron Lad stats with a great effect now. He's no longer something that you specifically have to build around. It's just like, oh, this guy's pretty sick. I find it hard to believe that he's not going to be good after that change. Like, he's going to be just a card that you throw in your mid-range decks because he has White Queen stats with an effect that's like twice as good as White Queen, so you play him, right? And that seems pretty compelling to me. It's like an absolute mid-range mirror breaker still. I expect him to be extremely good after the nerf, honestly. I just expect there to be like less dedicated Loki decks, but I still expect him to be quite metagame relevant and quite powerful at what he does. That said, you know, if there's less decks built around him, there's more potential for him to whiff. Decks that were built to be good against the current Loki are still going to be good into anything just Lokiing for like 3 or 4, just for like shits and giggles, because you're still going to be able to give them just a bunch of cards that aren't very good. He's going to have more defined weaknesses. I'd be surprised if he's gone, though. Hitmonkey is a card that has been, I won't say power crept by a bunch of other stuff, but it is in a space where it is no longer the best thing for its own decks to be doing. And what I mean by that is this card is typically only relevant as long as it is the biggest stat stick in whatever Sarah Mysterio type deck you're trying to play. Maybe you're not playing Sarah. Maybe you're playing like, you know, Jane Foster, draw like your Thor Hammer, your Yellow Jacket, your Wasp, and then play a Mysterio in him and make it really big. That's kind of the only thing you do with Hitmonkey. And we go back to the conversation about stat sticks that we've been having basically the entire time I've been making this video, which is only the biggest stat stick is the one that actually sees a lot of play. In a world where Hitmonkey was the biggest stat stick, we've lived in that world before. I don't think we currently live in that world, but it is a card that is worth taking into consideration in terms of like, okay, you know, maybe we could go back to that world. Who knows? Like, it's not impossible that this kind of card could come back into the metagame. It just strikes me as pretty unlikely. In a world where cards like Blob exist, it becomes very, very difficult for a bunch of small guys and one big guy to match up into that. In a world where cards like Goliath exist, it becomes very, very difficult for a deck that wants to throw priority and then distribute power where it wants on the final turn of the game. And it's no coincidence that the most viable Sarah has been in months has been without this card in the deck. I think that there's just been too much damage to what Hitmonkey decks do well with nerfs to Elsa, with nerfs to Angela, that I just don't really see the shell for this card existing in the current metagame. I don't think he's a big mover in terms of whether you should open this cache. That said, this is probably the overall most compelling cache for me, at least. The Grandmaster is in it. Loki is in it, Hitmonkey is in it. There are not bad cards in here, unless the Grandmaster sucks. We'll see about that. But, like, these are all cards that have been good in the past, Loki and Hitmonkey at least, and the Grandmaster is one of the most exciting cards, I think, in this entire thing. So, I would say that this is a pretty good one to open on, just for Loki alone if he ends up being good. Cough, cough, knock on wood, post-nerf, of course. I do think that a lot of the value of this one depends on just how good Loki and the Grandmaster are, and you are going to want to take a little bit of a beat and make sure that post-nerf Loki is still good, that post-nerf that Grandmaster ends up actually being relevant, because, like I said, with Grandmaster, there's definitely a possibility that he just kind of sucks and doesn't go anywhere and is like current Ravonna Renslayer, where it's like, all right, this is a cool card that does cool card things, but none of the shells for it actually make any sense or are any good. The upside for Grandmaster is, what if he makes bounce like super duper broken? What if the way he makes bounce super duper broken makes Hitmonkey good again? There are things that are like real questions to be asked with that card, and I do think that this remains a very compelling cache, maybe the most compelling of the entire month for someone like me who wants a challenge to figure out, and of course for someone like me who wants that sick President Loki variant. I am not normally someone who opens for variants. I probably will for that one, though. It's so sick. And of course, I do think that overall there are not as many whiffs in this cache as there are in plenty of the other caches that we see this month. Both previous caches we talked about had like 1 to 2 cards where I'm just like, I don't even really want that. And this one has no cards where I'm just like, I don't even really want that. That matters. Beta Ray Bill, Thor's alien horse ghost clone companion. I don't know Marvel lore, I'm sorry. Beta Ray Bill is a 4/5 that shuffles Stormbreaker into your deck. He has the ability, similar to Thor, of getting power from his hammer, or axe if you will. Stormbreaker is a 0/1 that doubles Beta Ray Bill's power. Now, I'm going to go deep into the vault here and say that this card is not very good, and here's why. When Thor first came out, he had the same text that he currently did. He was a 4/6, though, instead of a 3/4. Mjolnir added 6 power, and you know what 4/6 Thor was? It was terrible. It was terrible in the beta, before we had access to, like, basically any of the good cards. Awful. Garbage card. Completely worthless, even with Jane Foster, just not worth doing anything with. And so for that reason, he was changed to a 3/4 and became a little bit better. Beta Ray Bill is just 4/6 Thor. That's it. That's what he is. Now, there is some upside where you like, you do Wong stuff with him. You do like an Odin thing with him, right? You go like Thor into Beta Ray Bill, into Jane, into Odin, and then you like Odin, both the Stormbreaker and the Mjolnir. But then you look at it and you're like, okay, well, Beta Ray Bill, that's a 420. Thor, that's a 318. How much better is he actually? Why am I paying the extra energy for this? I just don't think that Beta Ray Bill is going to be your first choice Thor. If you're going to be playing a Thor deck, you put Thor in it, right? You put Jane in it, and then it's like, do you actually put Beta Ray Bill in there? I really don't know. And I kind of wonder about him because, like, I do think that in the context of something like Jane Jaw, having second Thor is like, yeah, that's actually pretty cool, and you probably will run him. But if you're only looking to run one, you're always going to run the 3 energy Thor instead of the 4 energy Thor, because they're both basically the same card. Now, Stormbreaker has 1 power. I don't think that matters either. I guess I just am a little bit sad because, as far as I can tell, I've seen 1 comic panel involving Beta Ray Bill, and it was awesome, and he looks awesome. And it just sort of sucks that he's like, oh, he's like bad Thor. I hope they do something about that, honestly, because he looks super cool. I know I've made some jokes about like how I don't know what he actually is, but what I do know is that he's awesome, and it sucks that his card is not awesome. Are you a normal person? A person who doesn't revel in causing hate and pain, sowing the seeds of strife among others? Do you hate everyone you play against? If the answer to your first question is yes, don't get Galactus. If your answer to the second question is yes, you should probably get Galactus. If you want people to be upset that they queued into you, this is your guy. His decks aren't that good. They're playable, but they're not that good. And that's where we like him, because as soon as his decks become good, he becomes the most annoying card in the entire game of Marvel Snap. You could argue that the Mount Rushmore for annoying cards could be Galactus twice, both as a 6/2 and as a 6/7. He has had to be significantly changed. Like, people talk about Professor X winning 1 lane. Galactus wins 2 lanes, usually 3. Like, this is the most annoying card. I cannot stress it enough. There is a certain type of game player who loves having asymmetric fun, where I get to have all the fun and you get to have none of the fun. And if you are that guy, I'm not going to stand in your way of getting Galactus. Is it going to raise your win rate? No. But if you're a certain type of person, it's going to raise your enjoyment of the game drastically, and there is no other card that can replicate what he does. In addition, Galactus is a big bad. He's going to be expensive forever. You should probably just pick him up while you can at some point. If you have the luxury of making decisions like that, and you have nothing better to do, I find it hard to believe that you just like won't ever play him. Although I will say I personally very rarely play him. So that, you know, if you're like me, maybe give him a miss. Maybe don't think of him as a draw here, but it is true that you probably will pick him up at some point, and it doesn't hurt to have him in your arsenal. Dude, I just don't know about Elsa anymore, man. Like, I am so sad at what they did to my girl. Look how they massacred my girl. Current iteration Elsa is not good. Just not a very good card. Hard to use. Hard to justify using. Nerf to Angela hurt everything you'd want to run her into. And her nerf, again, made her just not a card that has a home. I think that if there was a chance she got reverted back to the 2/2/2, where it was on fill up as opposed to like working with Brood right now in only one lane, maybe she'd be good again. Like, there are so few cards in the entire game of Marvel Snap that are reasonable early scaling threats, and she remains an early scaling threat where it's like you get her and she becomes like a 2/10 if you invest fully into her. But it's just so much harder to justify doing that when it only works on one lane instead of across all the lanes, because she doesn't give you that late game burst of power as well. You're just doing this slow moving buildup of like Jeff and Vision and stuff like that. And if you're only doing that, I don't think she's worth it. But if you're doing that in the if you're doing that and like flooding the board on the final turn of the game, suddenly she ends up very powerful. But you can't do that now because they changed her. Honestly, she's a card I want reverted. I don't think she's a draw as she is right now. I just don't think any of her decks are even close to being good. She's not something you want to be opening for. She's not very good. And I think that that actually sort of sums up this last cache. Beta Ray Bill, probably not as good as Thor. Galactus, probably not going to raise your win rate, but if you're a sicko, go ahead. And Elsa Bloodstone, probably not as good as she used to be, and I just don't know if there's a good reason to open this one, unfortunately. So, overall, what of these do I think are the most interesting caches? Well, I think the Kyera one is quite interesting to me, and I think that the Loki and Grandmaster one is quite interesting to me. The Kyera one is interesting because from the perspective of a new player, you can basically just get the entire She-Not deck. That's pretty cool. I'm really interested in more caches like that, where it's just like, oh, I saved up for this, and now I just get a deck. It might not be like a tier 1 deck, but it's like a solid tier 2 deck that you can just get access to by getting High Evo, by getting Nebula, and you might even use Kyera in it. The Grandmaster cache contains 3 cards that I'm just very, very interested in playing a decent amount of the time, but most of that focus is on Loki and the Grandmaster himself, who is a card that I'm really going to want to try to figure out. Do I know for sure what I'm going to do with the Grandmaster? I have no idea. My instinct is he's probably best in bounce, but I think that does raise a question of, if he's best in bounce, can we be a Hitmonkey deck again? Because boy, does he seem pretty good if you can reuse beasts and you can reuse things like demons off of the hood. That seems pretty compelling to me, but I do think that pushes you towards being a Hitmonkey deck. But then again, the things that push you away from being a Hitmonkey deck are when you fill the board up, your Werewolf by Night sucks, and so you kind of have to choose between Hitmonkey and Werewolf by Night. And the question then becomes like, okay, if we're playing Grandmaster, we probably want Bast, which pushes us more towards Hitmonkey over Werewolf by Night. And you can see how this deck is taking shape, and it might involve multiple cards from this cache. And then Loki is just Loki. I still expect him to be good after the nerf. I at least expect myself to play a decent amount of him. Yeah, he seems pretty reasonable to me post-nerf, so I'm probably going to keep playing him, and I want that President Loki thing. However, the other 3 caches are not without merit. It's just a little bit dependent on how willing you are to pick up bad cards. I think with the last cache, there's like no draw in it. Beta Ray Bill, Galactus, I'm just not that interested. But the cache with Annihilus in it and the cache with Werewolf by Night in it are pretty interesting, specifically because of those cards. So overall, I think that's how I would look at purchasing caches from the Marvel Snap cache key system with this month. I hope you enjoyed it. I realized that I just absolutely butchered the grammar of that final sentence. I'm sorry, I've been literally talking for like an hour, and then I'm going to edit this down. It's actually just been crazy. Thank you so much for making it this far. I have been Cam Best. You have been phenomenal. I will see you in the next one.